Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Dalí Museum for Coffee with a Curator. We have a lot of people here. We welcome all of you who are joining us for the first time. For those of you who come regularly, welcome back. We're happy to have you with us. Today we're going to be learning about the Surrealist journals in the exhibition from our librarian, Shaina Harkness. Before she starts, I want to tell you a few things. First off, hope you're enjoying coffee. Coffee with a Curator is sponsored by our cafe. So they provide the refreshment for this wonderful event. Good way to start the day. Also, this is sponsored in part by the city of St. Pete. So we are definitely in their debt for helping us to make this program happen for you. If you do have your cell phone, I always ask, please silence your cell phones. It can be a very musical event, which sometimes can be distracting and fun, but sometimes throws off our speakers. So if you do have a phone, just put it on vibrate. We do have a couple events coming up. First off, we have our benefit for our teen designer fashion show at Neiman Marcus tomorrow night. We are very excited. I don't know if there's tickets still available. I'm looking to see if Yvonne is here. But the tickets were available online. It's going to be sensational. It's also Neiman Marcus fashion plus the 30 students that went through our program in the fall. They'll be on the runway. We have Man Ray is our film on the same time tomorrow night for free if you want to come back and learn more about one of the key figures in our Surrealist show. In a week out on the 27th, my colleague Cindy Vickers is going to be introducing two films associated with Surrealism, Seashell and the Clergyman and Un Chien Andalou. So if you have not seen Un Chien Andalou, I am shocked, but you have an opportunity one more time to come and discover it for the first time. We also are really happy and excited that next month our Coffee with a Curator is going to focus on the history that coincides with our exhibition. We have Adrian O'Connor and Gary Mormino who are coming from USF St. Pete. They are two of the shining lights of the history department. Adrian is going to be focusing on the history that's happening in Europe at that time, coinciding with Surrealism. And of course, Gary's going to focus on Florida history from about 1928 to 1931. So you will understand contextually what's going on around the exhibition. And other than that, we have Drag Queen Bingo coming up in March. So little known fact, Drag Queen Bingo, or actually bingo itself, got started in speakeasies around this period of time. So thus, we are celebrating all things historical with Drag Queen Bingo. Last but not least, we do have a flyer on everybody's chair. We ask you if you get a chance to fill it out before leaving. You can leave it on our back table, or if you're in the theater, right outside of the theater. We're just looking for some information about how you enjoyed the Coffee with a Curator, and if you have any suggestions for ways that we can improve it. With that, let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Shaina Harkness is our museum librarian, our registrar, and our collection data manager. She has her master's degree in library science from USF, and she has a bachelor's degree in French and history from Stetson University. She assists our curatorial team all the time with preparing for our exhibitions, and also she has a number of really fascinating online exhibitions showcasing items and themes from our library. So if you haven't discovered that, you can go through our website, go to the library, and go to online exhibitions, and there's some really amazing stuff, which you will find out why we're excited because of what she's going to be talking about today, which is the lesser-known aspect of Surrealism, the way that they wanted to be seen in print. So with that, please join me in welcoming Shaina Harkness.
Thank you all for attending. It's been almost 2 years since I've done one of these, so I'm back in the saddle. Thank you, Peter, for this title, Revolution Between the Covers, the Surrealist Journals. Nod to Peter for that one, wherever he went. Okay, so to direct a review is to organize the embryo of a movement. So keep that in mind as we're going through these journals today. The dominant vehicle of the Surrealist preoccupation was the magazine. Okay, so this was from 1978 exhibition. If people know of Dawn Addis, she was curator. Fascinating book, very dense. It goes into much detail of the journal. All the journals. So up on the screen, these are the journals that we're gonna talk about today. So I'm gonna take you from 1919 to 1939, but I'm going to dwell on the three middle ones. So kind of a precursor to Surrealism, and then towards the end, because I'm trying to focus on the time period that we have upstairs in the exhibition, which is roughly 1929 to 1931. Now, in 1919, the 20s, they didn't have social media. I think we all know this. But their social media was the journal. I will use journal, review, periodical, magazine interchangeably, just so we don't get confused. I will say, and I don't know if John can help me, I can't see my notes, which is on the screen, not on the screen. I may need that. I'm gonna try and wing most of it, but we'll see. So again, they did not have social media, so the journals were that primary vehicle of the interchange of ideas. Artists and writers were trying to get their work out to the community. Now, this wasn't large circulation like we see today. This would have been in France, but these journals were actually taken over to the United States, so there were people in the United States who were reading these as well. But this is the way they communicated and expressed their ideas and developed who they were. And you'll see later on that oftentimes it becomes very contentious, and that these people are saying these quotes in black and white, so the whole world can see. Can we get my notes on the? Sorry about this. Not up on the screen, but the.
Yeah. So that should be, presenter view should be down here. So you should do that.
I don't see them.
So,
Okay, we're gonna have to wing it.
and then go back.
It's not good.
Yeah, yeah. So your presenter view.
Sorry, folks. I may have to get my hard copy.
Yeah, your notes aren't on your, they are below.
This, have you tried that one? No?
I tried to do, yeah.
Okay, thanks for your patience. I actually was sending a colleague up to bring my print version down, saved by the print version, but we've got it working. Thank you, John and Megan and Heather. Yes, thank you. Okay, so now it's going to be Mr. Toad's Wild Ride with this. Going back, again, I want to communicate that this was an exchange of ideas. Even when they were arguing, it was put in print. Okay, I'm taking you from 1919 to 1939, and I'm using the terms magazine, review, periodical, journal interchangeably. Okay, and sometimes these publications were simultaneously published, so the timeline may be going back and forth. So I could lose some of you. I will try not to. Also, this is a very dense subject. I'm going to try and make it as fun as I can, okay? I will admit that I did not read every article in these journals. That would be a lifetime of work. So I'm going to try and make it as fun and informative as possible. Okay, so the precursor, Literature, 1919. It was published, started by Breton, Aragon, and Soupault. Later on, Tristan Tzara arrives in Paris in 1920 and begins working on this. Francis Pacabia comes in February in 1920 and starts working on this review. So they are coming out of Dadaism, and Breton is already starting to have these ideas of what Surrealism means and what will it mean. So here's Soupault. He's a French writer and poet, one of the founders of Surrealism. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Louis Aragon, a French poet, one of the founders of the Surrealist movement. Francis Pacabia, painter, poet, typographist. Tristan Tzara, one of my favorite photos. Romanian and French avant-garde poet, essayist, and performance artist. And then, of course, most everyone in this room knows André Breton, the leader of Surrealism. He defined Surrealism as pure psychic automatism. So in literature, the review, he was starting to express those Surrealist ideas. But with literature, unlike the Dada, the difference was he became more systematic and sustained exploration of automatic writing. His first use is usine in literature. It's his first piece of automatic text. And this is in September 1919. Later on, now during this time, they were mostly short essays, poetry, virtually no illustration. There aren't any illustrations at this point. But now, come January 1920, we have an essay on painting, and it's about Curator. So we're starting to see the changes occurring. So come May 1929, this is the first time illustrations are used in this periodical, and it's one of Max Ernst's collages, which collage will become very important to the Surrealists. Also in the same issue, we have Ernst's geological drawings paired with an essay by Arp. So in 1922, they decided to rehaul the journal. It lost its bland yellow cover. It turned into this first one that had a top hat. Later on, they were illustrated by artists. And it was called the New Series. And it was a larger format than the previous. And in the very last issue, we have a photograph by Man Ray. And this is in 1924, June 1924. Now we're entering the inception of Surrealism. In 1924, October 1924, Breton publishes his first manifesto of Surrealism, So this is 4.5 months after the last issue of literature. And again, I'm not going to read the whole definition. I'll just say psychic automatism in its pure state. So he is defining what surrealism is. Quotes, let us not mince words. The marvelous is always beautiful. Anything marvelous is beautiful. In fact, only the marvelous is beautiful. So now Breton truly begins his surrealist journey. And we're going to see it through the pages. Between the covers, I should say. So here we are. This is the Surrealist Revolution. I'm not going to say the French because I need to speak a little quicker with this presentation. It was published between 1924 and 1929. The first issue comes out December 1st, 1924, 3 months after the first manifesto. These are the men who were involved in this journal. We have André Breton, Louis Aragon, Paul Éluard, Gala's first husband, Max Maurice, Pierre Naville, Robert Desnos, and Benjamin Perret. So this made up some of the Parisian Surrealist group. Éluard, French poet, one of the founders. We have Robert Desnos, a French Surrealist poet. He also played a key role in Surrealism. Max Maurice, we'll get to know a little bit more about him later. French artist, writer, and actor. Benjamin Perret, poet, Parisian Dadaist, founder and central member of Surrealism. And this character, Pierre Naville, French writer and sociologist. So in the first issue, we have this quote, "Every discovery that changes the nature, the destination of an object, or of a phenomenon constitutes a surrealist fact." So here we are getting the overall tone of what this journal is going to show its viewers inside. So they chose this scientific magazine as a model for their journal. And it was actually Pierre Naville who suggested it as the model. And their intent was to have a rational investigation of the irrational. So in one way, it looks very austere, okay, very, block letters. But in fact, it was very revolutionary once you start reading the articles and how the texts are displayed within it. Another quote from the first issue, "It is necessary to start work on a new declaration of the rights of man." Dalí uses that later in his own pamphlet that he publishes. But with this journal, they are exploring the darker sides of the human psyche, things that we don't want to see and we don't want to think about. But the Surrealists wanted to put it in front of everyone. There was descriptions of violent crime taken from police reports. There was even a survey about suicide. And Breton is quoted with, "In the beginning of the ascent of the review was on pure surrealism, and that is why the direction was taken by Perret and Naville, who were then the most completely animated by the new spirit." So these first couple issues, Breton didn't take control. He let Perret and Naville be the main editors of this journal. Another quote, some of these are so great. "We are on the eve of a revolution. You may take part in it. It's giving you permission." And again, these magazines would have been sold in small bookshops in Paris, a lot of word of mouth. And again, there were French Americans who would be living in Paris, would see these, would take them back. So Americans did in fact know what was going on. So here's an example from their first issue again. So the Surrealists are choosing more specific social targets. Patriarchy, religion, and morality. They are gonna break it open and they are gonna define a new meaning for it. So in its first issue, they have this anarchist in the middle, Germaine Berton. Okay, so she had killed an activist of the extreme right in France, and she was acquitted by a jury trial. The Surrealists were so sympathetic to her and kind of idealized, and you see them all around the image of her in the center. Another picture, we have Benjamin Perret spitting at a priest, okay? So again, they are targeting these social targets, religion, and this is one of the examples. Another aspect about this magazine, not only was it a journal magazine, it had a research bureau attached to it. Okay, so this was one of the advertisements for the Central Surrealist Research Bureau. And I know Peter has shown this image before in docent classes and other lectures. I'm not going to read all the members, but here it is in 1924, the Surrealist Research Bureau, looking very dapper in their suits. Again, their goal was they were going to investigate the irrational. Here's another image of them surrounded, they're working on this automatic writing piece. They opened 4 days before the publication of the Surrealist Manifesto. So all this was in the works. The Surrealist Manifesto is published, then you have the journal being published. It's all in the same time period. So their job, they gather text, illustrations, human interest stories, anonymous information. One of which, and this was in the first and second issue, is suicide a solution? So they have a list of suicide reports. They have this question, and at the bottom, those of you who can read French, it's saying responses, please send to the Research Bureau with the intent of publishing the answers. So here's one of the answers. Killing oneself in the way one dreams means admitting a conscious and willed metaphysics of dreams. Corporal suicide is a solution. Moral suicide is another. The first is within the grasp of all. The second requires too great a progress in human thoughts. If you ever get a chance to, they're in French, you can find some that are translated. Flip through it. It's the first and second issues of this journal. And here's another one. Sir, allow me to answer your question by copying out the placard posted on the wall in my room. You can enter without knocking, but you are requested to commit suicide in order to leave. Again, these were published in black and white. They were being circulated. So really keep that in mind. So in the second issue, this article was even larger than the first, and I'm not going to give you the responses for there, but it went on for pages and pages. So the Research Bureau collected what people were sending in and published it. In this second issue, Breton announced that Artaud would now take over directorship for the magazine. We had Perret and Naville. Now it was going to be Artaud. So, and later on in life, his quote on suicide is, "If I commit suicide, it will not be to destroy myself, but to be put myself back together again." He actually wrote a book on Van Gogh and suicide and did the doctor's influence. And so Artaud had been thinking about this concept for a very long time. So he was a French playwright, poet, actor, and theater director. One of his quotes, "Open the prisons, disband the army." So I'm trying to give you a little glimpse into the personality of the Surrealists. And another quote, "With a view to more direct and effective action, The Surrealist Revolution aims at the rupture and disqualification of logic. That was their goal. So when Artaud takes over, he starts to include drawings, mostly by Masson, these automatic drawings, but his essays become more and more abstract. He's going in a direction that Breton necessarily doesn't want to follow. This was number 3. Artaud is the director now of the journal. And at this point, so we have one that Artaud has directed, and Breton says, nope, it's time for me to step up to leadership. More about the automatic drawing. Masson was used quite frequently, and reflecting back on 1924, Masson said, Surrealism was the only liberating movement, the only liberating idea that there has been in France, in the world. And you will see Masson actually goes away from Breton. He's actually kicked out and goes to Bataille's side, which we will talk about. Little information about André Masson. He joined the Surrealist group in 1924, expelled in 1929. So here we are at 1925. Breton is in this issue, number 4, he is writing his essay, Surrealism and Painting. So we come from a literature movement, and now the question is, can painting be surrealist? Artaud had already included some of Masson's automatic drawings, but now we're starting to talk about painting. And it becomes a dialogue, quite heated dialogue. In this article, Picasso is illustrated throughout. In an earlier issue, de Curator had already been illustrated. So the question had been brewing through these early issues. Now, de Curator was one of the first artists associated with Surrealism, with this internal debate, is painting a good medium for Surrealism? I'm sorry I have to flip through these so quickly. You can have a PDF of the PowerPoint if you'd like afterwards, not a problem. So here's a little background on de Curator. He was initially accepted into the movement, but the Surrealists were severely critical of his post-metaphysical work. Now, Max Maurice, we had met him before, was one of the editors, and he concluded in the case of de Curator that the images are surrealist, but not the expression. Is it really psychic automatism in its pure state? So they were questioning this. Aragon, the marvelous must be made by all, not just by one. So collage had been introduced back in 1921 in literature. Collage could be made by all. So Aragon accepted collage. But to Aragon, de Curator's professionalism was a betrayal of the marvelous. Now, Pierre wrote, everyone knows there is no surrealist painting. Neither the marks of a pencil abandoned to the accident of gesture, nor the image retracing the forms of dreams. So he's becoming a little more direct, even though he included Masson's automatic drawings in his essays. So with all this going on, Naville is damning the visual surrealism, Artaud is becoming more and more abstract, Breton takes over in the 4th issue. Now I've got to backtrack a little bit. March 11th, 1929, there is a meeting at the Bar du Château. Prior to this meeting, it's really funny, Breton sent out a letter to 76 people asking about their thoughts about individual versus joint action. And he required that they explicitly name those with whom they would or would not collaborate. George Bataille, who we will see next, writes back, "Too many effing idealists." And I will say, at this time, Breton and Simone, I don't want to get all into that, but they were going through the divorce. Max Maurice was her lover. At this meeting, Max Maurice was deemed the chair of the meeting. And in the middle of this meeting, where Breton is going to talk to everyone about their responses to his question, in walks Simone in a dazzling outfit. Kind of, there's Breton, Maurice is the chair of this meeting, and so we have this conflict at this meeting. So here's Bataille, who wrote that little quip back to Breton. In 1915, he dreamt of becoming a priest and went to seminary. In 1924, became the librarian in the medals department at the National Library of France. His own opinion of his work was at the side of Surrealism. It contained the best of Surrealism. So back to this meeting, and I took this by reading some biographies of Breton. Breton feared the most gifted writers would sooner or later betray the causes they once defended. Therefore, they must be constantly judged and eliminated if found wanting before they could wield influence. So that was the intent of the meeting. We're going to weed out before any destruction happens. Already in 1928, Boiffard had been excommunicated by Breton for his role in Simone and Max Maurice's affair. Boiffard, and we have photographs up in the gallery, in the special exhibit gallery. He was a photographer, he was an apprentice to Man Ray, and he was abruptly expelled by Breton in 1928. Later on, he aligns himself with George Bataille. Just keep in mind, all this is in black and white. Even the proceedings of that meeting were published in a journal. So Bataille, Michael Larice, and Masson all voted against collective action. That was the question that Breton had originally posed to everyone. Now, the last issue of the Surrealist Revolution, December 1929, Breton accused Masson of having abandoned his surrealist convictions after finding himself in second place to Picasso. So now we're starting to it's getting personal here. Now, in retrospect, Masson quoted the difference between Blomet, the studio at Blomet, and Breton's Rue Fontaine was the issue of morality, of which he felt was of importance to Breton, but not to him. So that's what Masson felt was the key element in their breakup. Okay, now we've entered document. This is being simultaneously published along with the Surrealist Revolution. 15 issues appearing between 1929 and 1930. We're coming out of a period where the modernization of sociology, anthropology, and ethnography is now coming. So this journal is going to bring a lot of those elements into its pages. Larice said it was conceived as a war machine against received ideas. This review was launched 1 month after that meeting at the bar. So Bataille wrote his answer to Breton. There was a meeting. Bataille aligns himself with others, and they publish this magazine. It was lavishly designed, with almost 1/3 of it being photographs or illustrations. It was a maverick magazine, which was in part the embodiment of a sort of heretical surrealism. Basically, it boiled down to Breton versus Bataille. Breton in the past had been upset because some people had read Bataille and thought it was Breton. So there was some issues there. Strangely enough, though, he loved Bataille's Story of the Eye. Breton quoted, "Not only is it the most beautiful erotic book I know about, but it's also one of the 7 most beautiful books I've ever read." Here's Story of the Eye. He actually published it anonymously. I'll quickly go to the next slide, and we're going to see the contention between these two men. So Breton talking about Bataille, it is noted that Mr. Bataille misuses adjectives with a passion, befouled, senile, rank, sordid, and that these words, far from serving him to disparage an unbearable state of affairs, are those through which his delight is most lyrically expressed. And it just all starts to unravel. Bataille, he was kind of like the pessimist. Bataille the pessimist, Breton the idealist. Bataille, one of his famous quotes, "It is impossible for man to behave differently from the pig rooting in the slop heap." Okay? So this was in contrast to Breton's image of surrealism as man's path to freedom. Bataille thought, no, you need to stare at violence. You need to really look at it because this is human nature. Another little note that's kind of funny. Breton was repelled with Bataille's fascination with excrement, corruption, horror, and suicide. Suicide thing I do not understand, since back in Surrealist Revolution, there were 2 large articles on suicide. Strangely enough, Breton had the same hesitations about Dalí in the beginning, the fascination with the scatological excrement. Bataille, for the most part, considered Breton a harmless idealist in radical's clothing. One of Breton's favorite Karl Marx quotes, "Transform the world." He would often cite it. Well, Breton used Karl Marx as well, but he chose this one. "In history as in nature, decay is the laboratory of life." So here we are, the 3, they were all collaborators on Documents. I'm gonna have to quickly, sorry, I'm checking. Michael Larice on Document, "The most irritating works of art yet to be classified, and certain unusual works neglected until now will be the object of studies as rigorous, as scientific as those of archaeologists." So Document was going about it almost in the same way as Surrealist Revolution, wanting to take a scientific approach. And you'll see by the photos that they include in their journal. Bataille was considered the general secretary, but by number 6, he was the main editor. Again, Bataille describes himself as surrealism's old enemy from within. With Bataille is exploring the obscure intelligence of things. So again, these are Surrealist Revolution and Document are being published simultaneously. Breton, Bataille, these 2 camps going against one another, and it's all unfolding for the public. With Document, Carl Einstein was a co-founder. He's the only member of the editorial staff who had dealt with art in a professional capacity. George Wildenstein, the financial backer of Document, he wanted Document to be like the Gazette des Beaux-Arts. It did not turn out that way. It cost 3 times as much to produce. Though he wanted it to turn out, it cost 3 times as much. And again, because 1/3 of it was illustrations. An essay by George Bataille, "The Human Figure." This actually was his central text of anti-humanism. And he is taking these 19th century photographs of provincial wedding, and he is mercilessly mocking them. The article is actually rather funny, but again, we'll have to get it translated for everyone. Number 4, now, and I didn't know this until I was reading about it, these photographs were by a famous photographer, Nadar. These photos by him were admired by photo experts and surrealists, but Bataille didn't use them that way. He only displayed them to exhibit once famous persons in their ridiculous outfits. The dynamic between picture and text is an attack on naive humanism. So Breton wanted immediacy of expression through automatic writing. Document has a different strategy, and you can read it all, but that unblinking stare at violence. So these are where these two men are taking two different approaches. Bataille thought Breton was too idealistic. He wanted something based in reality. Breton was idealistic. Remember, Bataille wasn't in World War I. Breton was. He saw just the gruesome nature of man. And so I was able to take a positive out of that. When you see such horror, you want to think that man can rise above that and become more idealistic. So Document was based on another magazine, Jazz. They first published Eli Lotar's photographs, which you can see upstairs in the gallery. Document also published these later on in the year. These are, here's Lotar, a French photographer. Masson would go with him to the slaughterhouses and witness the horror. So these are upstairs, you can see them. Okay, so, and I won't dwell on that, but those were also published in Document, and we'll get to that. A little thing, now here's where we go a little back and forth. This image is a glossary from Surrealist Revolution. These terms were written by Larice, who later on went to Bataille's side, but this was a glossary, and loosely translated, it's glossary where I write concise, condensed glosses. Okay, it was basically an absurdist practice. They're redefining language. They're short, very short. So this is Surrealist Revolution. Here's another image of the glossary. Now in comparison, Document comes up with its own dictionnaire. It's a D definition, suggestions for usage, initially to handle abstract concept. And guess who contributed to the writing? Larice, who had written the glossary for Surrealist Revolution. Here's one example, the eye. This is a translation. Image of the eye, by its poetic virtues, the eye for centuries has been used for lyrical comparisons and allegories. And the first part of the definition is illustrated with Joan Crawford and the big eyes. That's the first part of the definition. So photos are now used in the dictionary by the time the 4th issue comes about. So this is the spread that's related to the eye. And you'll see over on the right is Dalí, a Dalí painting. But this second part, very disturbing. Cannibal candy. So we're talking about the eye as the cannibal candy. For nothing is more attractive in the animal or human body. However, extreme fascination is probably on the borderline of horror. So this is more translation of this definition. So as to render the horror of the eye. Firstly, the young woman's eye cut by a razor in the recent and admirable film by Buñuel and Dalí. In this film, the eye is seen attracting the blade, both being equally horrible and fascinating. Of course, they're referring to the eye slicing scene in Un Chien Andalou, which you can see, as Peter told you in the beginning. So at this point, they're referring to Dalí. They're not showing an image of Un Chien Andalou, though. They're referring to one of his 1927 paintings. Another term, poussière in French means dust. Okay, the caption under those photographs, which pictures would just stream into the office of Document, and they would just randomly pick them, and then they would put them in the magazine. So this one, with the caption underneath, is attics, mannequins, debris, and dust clouds. Their term, their definition of poussière, they don't just say dust or dust clouds. They say storytellers did not imagine that Sleeping Beauty would have awakened covered with a thick layer of dust. When the fat girls, good at doing everything, arm themselves each morning with a large feather duster or even with an electric vacuum cleaner, they may not be completely unaware that they contribute as much as the savants in removing the evil ghosts than cleanliness. I think you really have to flip through these journals to really to understand. I'm laughing because I have spent the last 4 months with my face buried in them. The next couple I'm going to go through quickly because they're kind of disturbing, but again, that unblinking stare at violence. So these are cinema ads, images of animals, a bandaged murderer, a promotional photo for the fur trade. These were under the term human-animal violence luxury. Okay, so they were purposely arranged so that one sees them together. They don't really correspond directly, but overall they do. So it turns against the slaughter of animals and castigates it as inhumane. And more about this. This is a German term for a finishing shop for fur makers. So you have this woman behind slabs of meat in her fur coat. Again, you have this bandaged murderer. You have a python eating a crocodile, or the other way around. I still can't see it. It's the top right. I've been looking at it and I still can't see. So it's emphasizing the suppression of everyday cruelty. Bataille is just putting it in everyone's face. So here is Lotar's picture of the abattoir, the slaughterhouse, next to the entry of slaughterhouse. Moving on, so the artists most related with Document were Masson, Boiffard, and Giacometti. There's an article entitled Alberto Giacometti, written by Larice, with an image of one of Giacometti's objects. Now, I'm just giving you kind of an overall what's in these magazines. So I think a lot of you have seen the big toe. This is a Boiffard photograph. It related to an article that Bataille wrote. It's entitled Big Toe of a Man, and the article is called Big Toe. So they didn't want you to see something as it was. So the enlargements undercut the conventional limits of perception without abandoning the realm of the documentary. Okay, the enlargement became an instrument of vivisection. So you don't really know what you're looking at first. And I will say, while I was doing this research, I'm at home, I'm putting these images in the PowerPoint. I have this up on my computer screen. My husband comes in from the back, and he goes, "Why do you have a penis on your screen?" And I'm like, this is what they were attempting. It clicked because he couldn't really see what was going on until you move up and really see the picture for what it is. So my husband just proved the point of what Bataille was trying to do. Again, he does this with a flower. It's an essay. There was internal arguments. I won't go on and on about that, but there was internal arguments, Einstein and Bataille, about where placement of photos would be. And they would kind of nitpick one another. And then Einstein would see the publication and be like, that's not how those photos were supposed to be represented with this essay. But they just had this back and forth. So through the enlargement does the sexual dimension of the plant become obvious, and the essay is the language of flowers. Bataille says about this, it, being the flower, abruptly returns to its primitive ordure. The most ideal is rapidly reduced to a tatter of aerial manure. That's Bataille's pessimism. Now this is June 1929. At the same time, we have a Belgian publication dedicated to Surrealism. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but it came out at the same time, dedicated to Surrealism. It is the only review that was advertised in Document, the only one. Here's a spread, one of the spreads in the magazine. So this was the issue that published the proceedings from that bar meeting in March 11th, 1929, of Breton asking the question of the Surrealists. Some say this magazine fueled the production of the pamphlet on cadaver, and we'll get to that. A little bibliographic information. We have Jose Corti, he was a young publisher and bookseller, agreed to distribute the last issue of Surrealist Revolution because Gallimard backed out. At this point, circulation was over 1,000. That was a lot for back then. Corti goes on and he provides the Surrealists with money to distribute and produce their publications. So he comes on the scene early. Now we're moving into going back to Surrealist Revolution. The last issue, we have the second manifesto. We had the first manifesto in 1924. Now the second manifesto where Breton is going to break ties. Without going into further detail, the kisses were basically those who have been excommunicated, you're getting the kiss off. This is your, and they knew that by looking at it, they knew. So by this time, the Surrealist group was in crisis. So Breton felt the need to clean house and forge an alliance with the Communism Party in France. The group's goals started to change at this point. And Breton is quoted, "One of the worst drawbacks of committed intellectual activity is the need to subordinate personal sympathies to that activity. I felt a pressing need to react against various kinds of deviations." So this is just to allow you to get into Breton's mind, what he was thinking at the time, why he was doing this. Also at this point, new artists are joining. Dalí is one of them. But of course, these listed up here, they have been excommunicated. And now comes the cadaver pamphlet. So this was immediately a month later, after that last issue where the second manifesto, he's breaking up with them, then this comes out. Who do you think is part of the team there? It's Bataille. So Bataille says, illustriously second-rate, non-entity of the Western world, exiled patriot of dreams, false brother and false communist, false revolutionary, but true show-off. So in this pamphlet, a lot of the artists like Boiffard, Bataille, Desnos contributed to this pamphlet. The photo montage of Breton and the crown of thorns, he had just turned 33, reference to Jesus Christ. Again, I won't get into all the details again. You can have the PDF if you so choose. And then a list of those who remained loyal to the movement. Now, at this point, Magritte's, he's going to be going back off to Belgium, but they are still producing Magritte images in his essay. I just wanted to show you that, but then right after, Magritte goes to Belgium, but the tenets of Surrealism would continue to inform his work. At this point enters Dalí. He is on the scene in the Surrealist movement. More of his paintings are being reproduced. Here's another one. And at the time, remember this was from Document. Document and Surrealist Revolution were vying for Dalí. Who won? Breton and Surrealist Revolution. They even published the script to Un Chien Andalou and Surrealist Revolution. Now, sorry I have to go through so quickly. Now we have Surrealism in the service of a revolution. So we have Surrealist Revolution, Document, they've ended. We have the second manifesto, the goals have changed, communism has come in. We have new blood circulating through the Surrealist group. Now this magazine was less popular. It only sold 350 copies. And it was even more erratically published. It could go 1 month and then 4 months later another one would come out. This title was a concession to the uneasiness that the French Communist Party felt about Surrealist Revolution. Poor Aragon, remember he was one of the initiators of Surrealism, worked with Breton. He became a communist. He went to Soviet Union to represent the Surrealists. At the time, they suspected them of Trotskyism and anarchism, so Aragon was forced to denounce Surrealism. He, in fact, signed a confession denouncing the Second Manifesto and promised that all literary activity would be under the control of the party. But not so fast. When he returned to Paris, he rejected the confession, pleaded with Breton, please take me back. And then in 1932, he publishes a notice again denouncing Surrealism. He is now fully committed to the Communist Party. Just a little anecdote there, the monogram is actually the astrological signs of Aragon, Eloire, and Breton. One of the essays that are in here, this was a telegram received by the International Bureau of Revolutionary Literature. They're asking Breton to clarify his position should imperialism declare war on the Soviets. The Surrealists reply, comrades, if imperialism declares war on the Soviets, our position will conform to the directives. Third International is members of the French Communist Party. But, so you're aligning with the Communist Party, but the Noailles were the financial backers. This is this dichotomy within Breton. So the Noailles actually had the original transcripts because they produced the money to publish the magazine. Another declaration of the Surrealists are resolving to apply the conclusions that are imperative after reading the Second Manifesto. By the 5th issue, the Communist Party is fed up with the Surrealism, and it had to do with this movie, The Road to Life. And what had happened was Breton had published a letter by this Fernand who had attacked civil and moral ideas of the road to life. So now Breton, by the 5th issue, he's breaking with the Communist Party. Breton needed to maintain his own authority and intellectual independence. Freud is still, he's still in the mix, but with a much more critical spirit. Marquis de Sade is applauded in this review. Afterwards, I can talk to you more about de Sade, but he was honored above all. They produced letters and passages from Justine. And now this is an example. Dalí is writing articles. The Rotting Donkey, it's one of his first paranoia critical activity writing. Notice the margins. Notice his is contained in the middle, as is Tristan Tzara. Just want you to make note of that. Here's an essay by Breton. There's no marginal text. The margins are smaller. the Breton's article is standout. That was just a fun thing that I found amusing. Within this magazine, we have stills from L'Âge d'Or, another film that Dalí and Buñuel collaborated in. And Dalí became a key collaborator in this journal. We see many illustrations of Dalí. He even writes, and I'm not going to get into this, but he writes this entire article about the surrealist object and breaks it down, what types of objects. And then he shows, this was the illustration that followed immediately. Again, the overall goal is to interchange these ideas and exchange and tell the world what these artists are doing. So then it's followed by the objects that Dalí is writing about. So in this magazine, most of the illustrations are at the end. I'm just going to go through rather quickly. But here is a key piece by Dalí. It's that paranoid activity, the African postcard, and Dalí sees it and is like, wait, I think that's a face. And he flips it around and it becomes a face. He makes a drawing, which is on the right. So this was published in that magazine. So later on, here's the painting by Dalí, 1934. The theory was a spontaneous method of irrational knowledge based on the critical and systematic objectivity of the associations and interpretations of delirious phenomena. More, again, the surrealists are idealizing people, the Pepin sisters. They brutally killed their master, so they are within the pages of this magazine. Lacan interpreted the Pepin sisters' crime as the ultimate paranoid crime. How befitting that then they included it in the magazine. This was interesting. We have a little text by Buñuel about a giraffe next to Arp's L'air et une racine. So Buñuel is describing a life-size giraffe cut from planks of wood. And then you see Arp's drawings. So they're connecting the text with the images. Breton said about this journal specifically, it was the most balanced, the best put together, as well as the most fully alive with a thrilling and dangerous life. It was in this magazine that surrealism burned with the most intense flame. I think he was most proud of this one. In the last issue, it had its one and only advertisement for Minotaur. Minotaur were outside of that 1931, so I'm just extending a little further so you can see. Okay, Minotaur's first issue is February 1933. It was intended as an organ of the dissident surrealists, Bataille, Laris, all of those. Albert Schira was the premium art book published, proposed to Breton this new periodical. He was the administrative director. He forbade Breton for expressing political views. This magazine was not to do that. Strangely enough, in another source, it says that Masson came up with the idea of Minotaur. He said, Bataille and I, who were then concerned with the most mysterious of the Greek and Iranian mythologies, proposed Minotaur. So who knows? Thériault was the artistic director. He really wanted a collaboration of all the surrealists at this point. That was his goal. In the beginning, Breton did not seek control. He was willing to tolerate. And he said, I will tolerate some of the group from Document. This was a Masson one that he would tolerate. Masson did this cover. But Breton was adamant. He would not work with Bataille. So this contention continued. Bataille ended up contributing only one article in 1935. So this was a luxurious magazine. It was large, it's beautiful. We have a facsimile and the real thing in our library. Its upper middle class readers made Zara and others critical of the venture. So here we have Max Ernst. So with these issues, surrealist artists would do the cover. This is an Ernst. Here is a Magritte. Even Picasso did a cover for the magazine. though he wasn't technically a surrealist. And then, of course, our favorite here, Dalí did his cover of Minotaur in 1936, and Dalí wrote for 8 of the 13 volumes of Minotaur. Remember, Dalí considered himself a writer before a painter. So the goal of Minotaur was to introduce surrealism to a new generation of theorists and artists, but with World War II, it ceased publication in 1939. Woo, okay. Again, this is the overall, and I had to fast track you through a lot of this, but the surrealists were proposing an alternative system of thinking and being. They undertook an active program of re-education through their publications. This was very important. So these varying ideas, views, and ideologies were put on the page for discovery. But surrealists, according to Breton, were like explorers, always anxious to extend their knowledge and to make new discoveries. And they did so between the covers of each of these journals. Thank you to Kelsey, to my volunteer Bill, Ira, Joan, and Peter for looking over this for me. Thank you. Woo. Sorry, I went over. Members of the Tampa Bay Library Consortium, come see me. Sorry we're a little late. We're going to go upstairs and view the library.